Thank you very much. Welcome to session 4 of the Global Town Hall. And we are so pleased to have it with us, highly respected members of the panel to help us discuss the ramification of great powers, the strategic competition and rivalries, the role of middle powers in a multipolar world, issue of multilateralism, and most importantly, issue of confidence building measures. So let me introduce to you our four members of the panel before we ask them questions. First is Professor Stephen Smith. He was the Minister of Defense from 2010 to 2013 and Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2007 and 2010 of Australia. We also have with us a well-known author and speaker, Professor Kishore Mahbubani, who is a distinguished fellow at the Asia Research Institute of the National University of Singapore. And of course, we have Major General Dr. Yunzhu, Senior Advisor at China Association of Military Sciences and Academic Committee member at the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University. And last but not the least, Professor Fyodor Lukyanov, Research Director of the Valdai Discussion Club, Chairman of the Council on Foreign and Defense Policy of Russia. So, to start our discussion today, I would like to ask question first to Professor Stephen Smith, which is related, in fact, with the speech of the Minister of the French Republic. So, my question, Professor Smith, and you have 3 minutes to answer this question. AUKUS has raised security anxieties in Asia and also of the wider Indo-Pacific region. How can Australia allay fear of its neighbors, especially China, about AUKUS implications for regional security? Can AUKUS contribute to regional confidence building in this period of growing major power competitions? Professor Smith?
Well, Rommel, thank you very much, and very pleased to join you and the other panelists for this session. Firstly, on Foreign Minister Drian's contribution, can I say there was hardly a word in that Australia or I could disagree with in terms of its approach and attitude if you put to one side the European context, but very much the thematic and the themes and the ideals and values expressed there are feel very common to me. In terms of AUKUS, I think AUKUS is going to be an instrument for peace and security in the Indo-Pacific. If you look at our part of the world, Australia started using the framework Indo-Pacific back in the 1990s, the early 2000s, because we saw that this century would not just be about the rise of China as a great power or the ongoing importance of the United States economically, but also the emergence of significant economies and powers. India in particular, Indonesia, so they'll be in the top 4 economies by 2050, the ongoing importance of Japan, and of course, where we've seen Minister Drian come from, the European Union. So it'll be a multipolar world or significant foci of influence. And in that context, whilst Australia and Indonesia and ASEAN remain committed to multilateralism in terms of global institutions, but also regionally, ASEAN, the ASEAN institutions, the East Asia Summit in particular, we're seeing now development of minilateralism or smaller groups starting to progress their interests together. The Quad is one example and AUKUS is another. So I think it'll be a force for peace and security. Initially, it was misunderstood in some areas. I think that needs to be put in context. In 2009, Australia indicated it needed to have a new submarine fleet because of our current aging fleet. And in recent times, the government has decided that should be a nuclear-powered capability, not a nuclear weapons capability. It'll be a modest nuclear fleet of up to 8 submarines, which of course is dwarfed by the existing nuclear submarine fleets that we already see, and is a modest contribution to Australia's military capability, again, which is dwarfed by other countries in our part of the world. More broadly, it will be a trilateral technological partnership where we'll also be looking at other technology in the modern world, whether that's artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, supercomputers, and the like. So I'm very strongly of the view that this relationship will be an ongoing instrument of peace and security. The presence of the United States in the Indo-Pacific since the end of World War II has been an instrument for peace and security and prosperity, and AUKUS will help see that continue. So to me, it reflects the multipolar world that we're moving into, in which Indonesia and India will play a significant role, and the basis on and one of the bases on which countries will pursue their interests, not just bilateral, but through minilateral arrangements, regional arrangements like the ASEAN-related institutions, but also our global institutions, whether that's the United Nations or the World Trade Organization or the G20. And all of those geared at the themes that we saw from Minister Drian, which is peace, security, and prosperity for all of our peoples.
Yeah, and can I have another minute of your thought, Professor Smith, about the view that the AUKUS was intended to really target China? What do you make of that?
Well, I think if you, to pick up again the theme from Foreign Minister Drian, we are now looking at a changed China. This is not the China that Australia or other countries dealt with in Australia's case from 1972 through to 2014-15. So a much more assertive and aggressive China, and a China which in Australia's case has essentially said, unless you change policy, we will subject you to economic coercion and economic punishment. And so a range of countries, not just Australia, are of course concerned about that changed attitude to China. That's not, of course, an argument to say, let's not talk to China. Of course, we want to talk to China. We want to make sure that competition, strategic competition between the United States and China, or between China and any other country, doesn't lead to contests, particularly military or kinetic contests. So we all have to ensure that uppermost in our minds are, whatever the competition is, we can't allow that to resort to kinetic force. And one of the policy areas where that can be effective is essentially through deterrence.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Smith. Speaking of China, I would like to ask this question to General Yao. General Yao, China is small, but increasing unilateral actions in the region create big reaction from its neighbors, like what China is currently doing in Taiwan and the South China Sea. And at the same time, China is championing multilateralism, which is perceived to be in decline. Can you explain to us the wisdom of why China is advancing multilateralism while it continues to conduct unilateral actions that raise security concerns of its neighbors? General Yao, can we have your thoughts about it?
Thank you, Dr. Romo. First, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the organizers of the Global Town Hall to invite me to this very important and timely international event. To your question, I think it is not quite appropriate to use and criticize China's unilateral actions out of context. China calls for multilateralism and supports United Nations-centered international system to manage international affairs. Regarding Taiwan, the United Nations has made its decision 50 years ago, that is to recognize the People's Republic of China as the sole legitimate representative of China in the United Nations. China has built its relationship with all other countries based on the one China principle, and that is there is only one China, and Taiwan is a part of that one China. And also a Chinese national law has stipulated that independence of Taiwan shall be prevented and stopped by all necessary means, including non-peaceful means. The issue of Taiwan is China's internal affairs, which does not allow any form of foreign interference or intervention, whether unilaterally or jointly. As for the South China Sea, China has suggested actually a dual-track approach for dealing with the issues in South China Sea. That is to solve territory issues through negotiations and consultations with countries directly concerned and to maintain peace and stability of the whole South China Sea area through the joint cooperation between China and ASEAN. And China has to safeguard its territory and maritime rights, not only in the South China Sea, but anywhere when its territory is threatened.
Yes, thank you very much, General Yao. We will have
okay.
We will have we will have your thoughts again later on. I'll just want to ask a question to Kishore. We have a follow-up questions later on with you, General Yao. Okay, but I would like to ask these questions to Professor Kishore Mahbubani, which is related with China's actions in the region. Dr. Kishore, Singapore is a small state with exemplary practice in dealing with major powers, especially between China and the United States. What do you think other Southeast Asian countries can do to de-escalate tensions between China and the US, particularly in the South China Sea, as mentioned by General Yao? So what is Singapore doing towards this end? Can you share that with us, Professor Kishore?
Thank you, Dr. Romel. First of all, let me congratulate Ambassador Dino Jalal on this spectacular conference, and you raised a very important question on Singapore and the US-China geopolitical conflict. I must emphasize that I'm not speaking on behalf of Singapore. I'm speaking as an academic. And I'll say the one big lesson I learned from Singapore's founding fathers, Lee Kuan Yew, Goh Keng Swee, Rajaratnam, is that geopolitics is a cruel business. Never ever believe that any great power is doing anything except to defend its own interests. And the notion of a benevolent great power is by definition an oxymoron. And so the role of small states, therefore, is to be very hard-headed and realistic in their analysis of what's really going on in the geopolitical scene, because small states are not price makers, they're price takers in this context. And here, frankly, the first step we need to do is to have no illusions about the sources of this US-China contest. In theory, it's about democracy versus communism. That's just a facade. The reality is that for 2,000 years, no number one power ever seats its number one position gracefully and says, take my position. And for the United States, it's a huge shock that after having been number one for 130 years, within 10 years, the United States will probably become the number two economy in the world. And every great power, and this has been documented by Graham Allison, will try to keep its position and will try to thwart the rise of China and ensure that it doesn't take over. And so what do? I must say, we in ASEAN, for a start, including Singapore, must speak out very clearly and say, what are our interests in this US-China contest? And our interests are to preserve the stability and peace that we have enjoyed for 50 years. And therefore, we should not be passive, we should not be silent, and we should tell both sides, why don't you step back and adopt a wiser approach instead of going head on towards a collision in this coming decade. So the paradox, I noticed the French minister used the word paradox. The paradox about the US-China geopolitical contest, which I document in my book as China Won, is that it is on the one hand inevitable and on the other hand avoidable. Because at the end of the day, if you live in a small interdependent world with common global challenges like COVID-19, it's important for these two sides to work together also on other areas. So what do small states do? I say speak out and speak the truth to power.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kishore. Now from Singapore, let's move to Russia. So I would like to ask this to Professor Lukyanov. Well, the former Soviet Union had a bitter experience with the US during the Cold War. So how can Russia de-escalate security tensions happening between China and the United States and avoid what other experts would call a new Cold War? What kind of confidence-building measure can Russia recommend to manage the current US-China major power rivalry? And based on Russian experiences, what confidence-building measures can work best between the two competing major powers? Professor Lekenam.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, it's a great honor to speak at such a fantastic event. It's very interesting to listen to our perspectives from colleagues in the region. Russia is a little bit ambivalent. We are a part of this region, but a little bit distant from it, not geographically, but mentally, because from my point of view, unfortunately, Russian political thinking still is too much Western-centric. And we look at relationship with Europe, for example, much more than we should do in today's world. I couldn't agree more with Professor Mahbubani because I think he gave a fantastic realist picture of how great powers behave. And Russia, contrary to many Western powers, used to be very blunt in describing how international affairs look like. And I'm afraid that this view is now much more applicable to international system than we believed 10 or 15 years ago. As for experience, I'm afraid that Soviet-American experience will not be that that great achievement in the region we discuss. Because as we remember very well, the stability of the Cold War, which was in place, and that was actually extremely stable period of international history of international relations. But this stability was based, first of all, on nuclear deterrence and the mutually assured destruction. So we should be honest about this. Whether we believe that this way is okay for Asia, on the one hand, yes, because the very fact that both China and the United States possess nuclear arms guarantees that it will be no direct military collision between those great powers, the collision which most likely would be in place if they don't have the nuclear capabilities. So in this regard, it's positive. But in other regards, of course, I guess that Asia Pacific and Indian Ocean still need to accommodate themselves to this consciousness that the stakes are that high. So that's what mankind started to forget compared to the Cold War time. Secondly, that's, I think, a very important difference between that period and now. So the Cold War time between Soviet Union and the United States, we had a very fierce and bitter ideological struggle, which was bad enough. But in a certain way, those ideologies, they derived from the same root. So that was basically the big Western philosophy, which produced both Marxism and Western liberalism. And to a certain extent, this struggle was based on rivalry, but same categories of understanding. I'm afraid that in current situation between China and the United States, we have not an ideological struggle, whatever President Biden would say. We have a cultural clash. And that used to be handled much more difficult than the ideological battle as during the Cold War. So I'm afraid the first thing we need to do to learn each other, Chinese and Americans. And finally, in this part, the new Chinese behavior has been mentioned by Professor Smith as willingness to use, for example, economic warfare and other means of pressure. That's correct, but I would remind you, but the master of those means and those approaches is the United States. We just learn how to do it from them.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like to go back to General Yao. General Yao, sorry to cut you short earlier, but there's another question for you. So what is the prospect of the US and China reaching mutual strategic accommodation? And what would it take to reach that point, General Yao? General Yao, please unmute yourself, please. Okay, go ahead. General Yao, please unmute yourself. General Yao, you're unmuted. Hello. So we'll go back to General Yao because yeah. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, sorry, we missed you for a minute. Can you repeat your response again, General Yao, on my questions about the strategic accommodation between the United States?
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for the question. I had some problem to unmute myself. To answer the question, I would like to say it is time for the United States to accommodate a rising China. For it has been, I think there is a spreading a view in the United States that the 4-decade China policy to engage with China has been a mistake. China has grown up too big and too fast, but has not changed in the way that the United States would like to see. As Professor Smith just now mentioned, China has changed. But I would say that China has not changed to the liking of United States and other Western countries. And as to the prospect, my American colleagues would often remind me that the relationship would get worse before it can get better. But recently, some encouraging sign, there's some encouraging development, which Foreign Minister Wang Yi briefed us in the opening remarks on the video summit between President Xi Jinping and President Biden a few days ago. I think both leaders committed to communicate, to keep communication open, so that they can provide leadership guidance to manage the relationship and to cooperate in dealing with global issues such as pandemic and climate change, and to manage difference and sensitive issues constructively, and to reject the prospect of a Cold War and try to coexist peacefully. I hope the relationship has at least hit the floor, I'm not sure, and could be stabilized. But what follows next? It might be a V-shaped improvement or a L-shaped stagnation. I do not know. I wish it will be the former, and I expect it to be something in between. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Yao. Now I have a question again to Professor Kishore, because I saw in your background, there's a book there written by yours, Has China Won? So in that context, I would like to ask this question, that the US-China rivalries, as well as rivalries among major powers, are not decreasing, and in fact, they are steadily increasing. We are wondering, and in fact puzzled, why is it so difficult for the major powers to engage in cooperative activities, even on the most obvious issues? After all, in every speech by their leaders, they are always saying that no one can solve the world's problems alone and they need to work together. Your thoughts on this, Professor Kishore?
Yes, I mean, I very much share your hope, Dr. Rommel, that the great powers would learn to work with each other, because we do live, and this is a very important thing to emphasize, all of us, 7.8 billion people, live in a planet in peril. seriously. I mean, climate change is real. And frankly, unless the United States and China collaborate to find a solution, we will not find a solution to climate change, or even to other pressing global problems, by the way. But at the same time, the problem about the human condition is that so many of our impulses are driven by deep history. And one of the deepest impulses of societies has always been that in geopolitics, as I said in response to my first question, the desire to remain number one is very, very powerful. And unfortunately, even though, frankly, I would argue, as I have argued in the United States, it is actually in American national interest to try and find what I call a win-win solution vis-a-vis China. And you can work it out. But to achieve that, it does require an acceptance of the fact that the past 200 years of Western domination of world history has been a major historical aberration. Because from the year 1 to the year 1820, for 1800 out of the last 2,000 years, the two largest economies of the world were always those of China and India. So what we are seeing after 200 years of Western domination is the natural return of two very strong, successful societies, China and India, and they'll become number one, number two by 2050. And fortunately, you can conceive of a world where China, India, and Europe and other great powers and the United States can live and work together in peace. But unfortunately, and I can tell you this is very sad, I just spent 4 weeks in the United States. The anti-China sentiment has really shot up, amazingly. In fact, the first paragraph of my book has China won. I say, Dr. Rommel, that the US-China contest may have been started by President Trump, but it will outlast him. Sadly, my prediction in page 1 has come true. Trump is gone, Biden has come in, Biden disagrees with Trump on everything, but on China, basically his hands are tied. So that is the reality that we in ASEAN have to deal with, that this decade will be a dangerous decade. Let's have no illusions about it. Let's be very clear. It's a dangerous decade. So therefore, we actually must speak out. We cannot keep quiet. The biggest problem I have, and I'll say this somewhat dangerously to my fellow Indonesian friends, is that my fellow Indonesian friends are too polite, too halus. They should be speaking out and speaking the truth to power, as I said. And please persuade United States and China that there is a wiser course. Let's avoid this zero-sum geopolitical contest that has begun. But I tell you, unless we in ASEAN speak out louder, our views will not be heard. And so this is why this conference is very important. Let the ASEAN voice come out stronger and the world will be a safer place.
Thank you, Professor Kishore. Now, let me go back to Professor Lukianov. Professor Lukianov. Earlier, I asked Professor Smith about AUKUS, and there is a perception about AUKUS that it can encourage an arms-raising behavior in the Indo-Pacific. Do you see the possibility of an elevated arms race resulting from the present geopolitical competition, Professor Lukianov?
Yes, indeed. I think it's almost inevitable. The only restriction, the only limit for this, from my point of view, is can be money. It might sound paradoxical, but we know that the cost of new weaponry, new armament is enormous. And on the one hand, of course, geopolitical competition, as during the real Cold War, normally big powers, they don't shy to spend money on this, but at the same time, this is maybe the one of most important differences in between now and then, that the whole world lives in the paradigm of a market economy, including China, including Russia, including even Iran and all possible countries. And all governments need to count money, because first of all, they should address needs and interests of all nations. And I hope that that will bring governments to certain understanding that arms race should be more rational than we considered 40, 50 years ago. Having said that, I'm not optimistic. I think the AUKUS contributed to the arms race in Asia Pacific, but also globally.
Wow. So that will give a segue to Professor Smith to respond. But let me ask this specific question of Professor Smith. Does the Indo-Pacific have the potential to be a strategic concept that can minimize competition and conflict, enhance cooperation amidst this AUKUS project? And what if China, the largest country in the region, continues to refuse the Indo-Pacific concept?
Well, thanks, Robert. I think the strategic notion of the Indo-Pacific gives us every perfect opportunity to continue to pursue the things that we really want to pursue for our nations and our people, which is peace, security, and prosperity. So the Indo-Pacific is simply a notion which says China and the United States are not the only two shows in town. And the name, of course, Indo, tells you that India is on the rise, Indonesia and ASEAN is on the rise. So as I said earlier, whether a particular country, China or other countries, accept the term Indo-Pacific as a strategic notion, the reality is that in the blink of an eye, Indonesia, India will be, together with the United States and China, in the top 4 economies. And other significant nations and groupings of nations will also be seminally important, whether it's Japan, Republic of Korea, or the European Union. And so we have to live in that world. Now, in terms of military capability and AUKUS, let me make this point, that if you look at where the largest capability increase has been in recent times, whether it's conventional or nuclear, that of course is China. So China has been the largest growing conventional and nuclear weapons power in the last decade and a half. Just to put things into perspective, Australia, in terms of surface vessels, has effectively 14 warfighting ships, if you limit that category to frigates, destroyers, and to amphibious supply warlike ships, 14. In the last 12 months of production, China increased its fleet by that number alone. So we need to be very sensible and sober about the notion that somehow Australia's military capability is leading to an arms race. Indeed, I've seen some analysts argue that if anything, you can only regard it as a response to the massive capability increase, both nuclear and conventional, that we've seen from China. But can I make a couple of points in response to earlier remarks? Firstly, accommodating a rising China. Well, from the 1970s on, the global community didn't just accommodate the rise of China, it absolutely encouraged it. We wanted China to embrace the world, to start trading. We wanted to see hundreds of millions of people come out of poverty, and they did. We welcomed China into the World Trade Organization. And so the international community, in contrast to the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union, actively engaged an economic trade and investment relationship with China. And things worked very well until a half a dozen years ago, when China changed. And General Hua talked about China safeguarding its territory. Well, it's not just safeguarded what China believes as its own territory, it's actually, against international law, acquired the territories of others, including in the South China Sea, and against the unanimous decision of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. All the international community ever wanted of China when China rose was that China abided by the rules of the road. And it's not abiding by those rules of the road which is causing the current consternation. But can I also pick up a point that General Yao made, which is it was very important for President Xi and President Biden to essentially say we need to bring the temperature down, as we saw in their presidential digital meeting in the last few days. So bringing the temperature down is important. We do need to search out where the US and China can cooperate together. And as Kishore has said, climate change is absolutely an area where that must occur. And we saw China regrettably not turning up to the Glasgow conference, but agreeing on a bilateral basis after the conference with the United States to do things in conjunction together. Now, whilst I regret China was not at Glasgow, it's an unambiguously good thing that China and the US are prepared to cooperate on climate change. One final point, can I pick up from Fyodor? I thought he made a really important point about the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. The United States and the Soviet Union had next to no economic relationship, whereas China, the United States, and over 130 countries all have a deeply significant trading relationship with China. So there was no economic relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. But as Fyodor correctly pointed out, there was a deeply entrenched military-to-military, defense-to-defense, security-to-security relationship, so as to ensure that there would not be a catastrophe as a result of misadventure, miscalculation, or misjudgment. And one of the things that we all have to encourage the United States and China to grow is that same sort of relationship. And I was very pleased to see emerging overnight in the United States media that as part of President Xi and President Biden's conversation, that the US and China are now looking at whether they can grow that military-to-military, defense-to-defense cooperation, because that will be essential to avoiding miscalculation. And if I can make the particular point, Fyodor made the point about the very forensic approach that the US and the Soviet Union took to nuclear weapons. We need to see the development of the same protocols and accords so far as nuclear weapons and China are concerned, with not just the United States, but also with other nuclear weapons countries. Thank you, Rommel.
Thank you very much, Professor Smith. In fact, we are already receiving a lot of questions from the floor. But before I ask those questions from the floor, I have one last question to Professor Kishore and General Yao. But let me ask General Yao first. Pak Dino at the opening statement said that in an increasingly divided world, the space for dialogue is shrinking. Do you agree? So General Yao first. Do you agree with that?
Thank you. I think I should say I agree and disagree. There are global trends which tend to divide nations and peoples, but we have diverse global trends, both dividing and integrating at the same time. I think globalization has not burned out of steam yet, and instead, the digitalization of the globe has just opened up a new era where we see unprecedented connectivity between states, societies, and peoples of different geographical areas, cultural backgrounds, religious beliefs, and way of life. This provides a force for increasing interdependence and global integration. As for the space of dialogue and cooperation, I think there is always space there. It just takes political commitment, international consensus, and domestic support to expand the space. And I believe that humanity has grown smart enough to see the importance of dialogue as proved by this global town hall, which provides a wonderful platform for debate, for argument, for discussions. And these in turn are important drivers for building consensus on cooperation. I must thank the global town hall for inviting me again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Yao. How about you, Professor Kishore? Do you agree that the dialogue is shrinking, as stated by Pak Dino earlier?
Well, I mean, certainly I was a diplomat for 33 years. And I can tell you that there's no substitute for a good face-to-face conversation. So I'm actually very happy that President Xi and President Joe Biden met. But I can also tell you that to have a good dialogue, you have to be able to understand the other person's point of view. Try very hard. I mean, let's say, for example, in arms control, that's been brought up, right? The Americans say that China is spending too much on defense. But you know that the American defense budget is more than 3 times the size of China's defense budget. They say that China has too many nuclear weapons, but China has 250 nuclear weapons, and the US has 6,000. Okay, so, you know, in some ways, actually, it's not wise for the United States to complain about China's defense expenditure. Actually, it shouldn't focus on it. It should discourage the way to discourage China from expanding its armaments is to not focus on that dimension. Here, I want to add a very, very important point, okay? Because let's be very clear, when I say this is a dangerous decade, let me explain why. Until a few months ago, I was actually quite confident that there will be no war between the United States and China. Now I'm not so sure, because there's a fundamental misunderstanding of how core and interest Taiwan is to China. And many Americans don't understand that Taiwan is the last living symbol of the century of humiliation that China suffered from 1842 to 1949. And if you don't change the status quo, just recognize that Washington, D.C. has official relations with Beijing, unofficial relations with Taiwan, and then there'll be no war, there'll be no breakdown. But if you, on the one hand, and this is my fear of the Biden administration, on the one hand, he speaks about the one China policy. On the other hand, is also increasing its links, encouraging democracy in Taiwan, and so on and so forth. And it is crossing a red line. And that's actually very, very dangerous, because what's going to happen? And to understand this is let's go back to the last time when we faced the prospect of nuclear war in the Cuban Missile Crisis. You notice that John F. Kennedy had no choice. When the Soviet naval vessels began to carry nuclear weapons to Cuba, John F. Kennedy had to stop them. And that, as you know, could have led to a nuclear war. So in the same way, you could have a fundamental misunderstanding on Taiwan. Because if you encourage Taiwanese independence and you lead to a declaration of Taiwanese independence, there will be war, and no one can stop the escalation. So let's be clear why we have to increase this dialogue, because we need to prevent the worst case scenario.
Thank you very much. Now we have to start asking questions from the floor. So there's one question from PG Island, from Hosaipa. And this question is specifically addressed to Professor Smith. And the question, Professor Smith, is, has US-China competition affected Australia's efforts to maintain influence in Oceania? Professor Smith, go ahead.
Well, if I could just underline this point, all of us, whether it's Australia, whether it's China, whether it's the US, whether it's ASEAN, we all have to be doing our bit to try and ensure that any US-China competition doesn't lead to military conflict. That's absolutely essential. And that's why it was very important, including on Taiwan, that both President Xi and President Biden lowered the temperature. Australia recognised China in 1972 with a one China policy. We have cultural and trade links with Taiwan, but we've also made it clear that whatever occurs in respect of Taiwan needs to be done peacefully. It can't be done with military force. So far as the Pacific is concerned, a very important piece of the regional architecture for Fiji, for Australia and the Pacific is, of course, the Pacific Island Forum. Australia is a very active member of the Pacific Island Forum, and we have been absolutely committed since the end of World War II to the South Pacific and to assisting our colleagues in the South Pacific. And so I don't see, and of course Australia has been in a security alliance with the United States effectively since the end of World War II, and that hasn't disturbed in any way our efforts in the South Pacific. Indeed, as I said earlier, the presence of the United States in the Pacific has also been a force for prosperity, peace, and security. But if I could just flip that, because we've spent a bit of time talking about Indonesia, and ASEAN. And I've also spoken about the importance of not viewing this just through the bilateral lens. And we haven't yet spoken about ASEAN, but it was as a result of Professor Kishore talking in terms of dialogue and the importance of dialogue. We should not forget, as we look at the Indo-Pacific, we should not forget that the East Asia Summit remains the most powerful, relevant discussion and meeting forum for Indo-Pacific nations. So we have the ASEAN 10, soon to be chaired by Indonesia, but we also have US, China, Japan, Korea, Australia, Russia, and others. And so every year, presidents and prime ministers are forced to talk about peace and security. Foreign ministers every year have to talk about security, and defense ministers every year, or every second year, but soon to be every year, also have to talk about peace and security. So that we should not forget, despite some people wondering whether ASEAN has an ongoing centrality, that the single most important piece of the regional architecture for peace and security in our part of the world is the East Asia Summit. But we need to continue to encourage a dialogue and to make sure that competition, whatever area that is in, whether the competition is in trade, whether it's in cybersecurity, whether it's in intelligence, that doesn't default to kinetic contest, which would be disastrous for China, disastrous for the United States, and disastrous for the region and the globe.
Okay, thank you. So I have this question from Australia, from Clark, but I would like to address this question to General Yao. General Yao, what exactly does China rise mean? Economic rise is welcome, but how about military rise? As I said, according to this question, it is unnecessarily military rise. Is nothing to be proud of. So, what do you mean? What do you mean by China rise, General Yao?
I have to say that China's rise include a military component. It's but so China has when it opened up in the late 70s, it had as its objective 4 modernizations. The last modernization is defense modernization, and China has been weak and humiliated because it's weak not only in economy but also in military capability and in international influence. So I think China cannot just rise economically, it has to rise with comprehensive national power, and the military component is definitely in it. But having said that, I have to say that China's defense budget for the last 30 years, for the last 30 years, had been between 1% to 1.5% of its GDP. And that's a much lower percentage than most of the countries in the West. In NATO countries has been constantly requested by United States to spend up to 2% of their GDP for defense spending. But China has never been to that high. So I think China's military modernization is justified. It has national interest to defend. It has global interest to protect. And it also has to do with national pride. I think Kishore made the point that Taiwan is almost the last symbol of the 100-year humiliation of the Chinese people. And it might also be the case that are frequently thought of as having the possibility of using force. And this morning, Minister Wang Yi said China would exert utmost effort to solve the Taiwan issue peacefully, but it had never renounced the use of force. And some of the actions is there to prevent, to deter Taiwan independence, and that would be better to achieve the peaceful reunification at the end.
Thank you, General Yao. There's a question here from Indonesia, from Alif Imam, but I would like to ask this question to Professor Kishore. Professor Kishore, the question is, nowadays we see many rivalries and ASEAN has its own perspective, position, and alignments. Can ASEAN countries maintain its strategic autonomy? Are we able to stand outside from this rivalry? Dr. Kishore.
Let me be very honest and say that ASEAN is going through a very difficult patch now. Besides the Has China Won, I actually wrote a book called The ASEAN Miracle that was published in 2017 on the 50th anniversary. And the remarkable thing about ASEAN is how it has brought peace and prosperity to the most diverse region on planet Earth. And as Professor Stephen Smith said, it has actually created the East Asian Summit, which has actually brought peace also to a wider region also through its processes. But the challenge for ASEAN is that, as I say, in the 2020s, which will be a dangerous decade, when the demand for ASEAN diplomacy will increase, the supply of ASEAN diplomacy will unfortunately decrease. And I'll be very frank with you. Too many ASEAN countries have domestic problems. I mean, I don't have to name them, okay? you know what I'm talking about. And if you have lots of domestic challenges, you don't have time for foreign policy. But let me add a bit of hope here. The bit of hope here is that Indonesia actually has been remarkably successful as a country. I just published an article, by the way, for the project syndicate called The Genius of Jokowi. And as you know, President Jokowi has done a remarkable job, both in politically unifying the country and delivering economic growth. So I think if Indonesia can play a more active role, then I think it's possible for ASEAN to increase its supply of diplomacy, which is what Indonesia has traditionally done. And here I want to add, by the way, incidentally, we mentioned lots of terms, lots of initials. We haven't mentioned the most important thing, which is a four-letter word called RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And I actually believe the RCEP, which, as you know, will come into force in 2022, will be a game changer. And this actually, RCEP is an ASEAN miracle, because the paradox about ASEAN, even though, as I said, is very weak, you know, the United States has its two strongest allies in East Asia, Japan and South Korea. And you know what? The United States cannot persuade Japan and South Korea to sit with each other. I just heard on the BBC, a US minister traveling to Northeast Asia couldn't get Japan and South Korea to sit with the US minister, right? They can't talk to each other. But guess what? ASEAN succeeded in persuading Japan and South Korea, together with China and Australia and New Zealand, to join a free trade agreement. I can tell you one thing. If China, Japan, South Korea sat at a triangle table and tried to negotiate a free trade agreement, it would fail. But guess what? Because ASEAN hosted it, ASEAN umbrella, it succeeded. And most of the growth, by the way, is going to come from the integration of the Japanese, South Korean, and Chinese economies through RCEP. So ASEAN will be weak, but at the same time, while it is weak, it can still perform miracles.
Thank you very much, Professor Kishore. Now, from ASEAN, let's move to Russia again. So I would like to ask this question to Professor Lukyanov. Professor Lukyanov, how much do you think should values such as democracy, freedom, human rights, sovereignty, non-interference, non-intervention, rules-based order, etc., what have you, can be driving geopolitical competition?
You know, you mentioned several categories, which from my point of view belong to completely different areas. Because when we speak about rules-based order, for example, it is perceived in Russia, and I guess in China as well, as something completely different than Americans and Europeans would love to give in those notions, because a rules-based order is a product of liberal world order, and the idea is that the most advanced countries, like Western powers, they formulate those rules which by default should be universal. It will not fly at all anymore, because we are moving towards a situation when universalism is on decline in all regards, while countries, not just the big powers like China or Russia or India, but also countries of middle-sized countries, they don't want to, first of all, to obey to somebody else's rules. Secondly, they don't want, we started with the suggestion that probably the new Cold War would mean that minor countries or middle-sized countries will be forced to choose between new superpowers, US and China, as it was the case during the Soviet-American confrontation. But I'm almost sure it will not happen this time, because all countries will rather try to avoid to make a firm commitment to one side and to antagonize the other side. And that's actually what Professor Mahbubani just said about ASEAN. ASEAN is absolutely not interested to be part of this confrontation. That means geopolitics, but that also means cultural and ideological and all these issues you mentioned, because each country should, first of all, in the best way, serve the purposes of its own development. And unfortunately, after the end of the Cold War, we saw a lot of examples of how rules formulated somewhere else do not improve situation in particular countries, but just the opposite. So unfortunately, Russian experience in 1990s was, which I remember very well, was disastrous, because it was a very dogmatic view on how, for example, Russian economy should be reformed according to the International Monetary Fund recipes and so. It was not a bad will on the side of IMF or US, but it was just the absolutely wrong perception of how other countries can work. So to your question, I don't believe that we should try to structure the new relationship based on those notions.
Thank you. So because this is a global town hall around the clock, around the world, we have questions from Liberia, from Kellen. So maybe I'll ask this question to General Yao. General Yao, in what condition that could make China and the United States agree on certain global issue? Other than climate change, what more can be? General Yao. Go ahead, General Yao. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few areas. Climate change is one of them. Counter COVID-19, which should have been an area of robust cooperation, but which have been heavily politicalized and used for domestic or international rallying purposes. So, but I think it's still we still have time to cooperate in providing vaccine and treatment, cure for the world, and also some some non-traditional areas like international drugs trafficking, and also maybe in infrastructure building. But now I think that there are China and the United States are going both in direct way, in separate ways. But in the Biden-Xi Jinping summit, I noticed that President Xi Jinping said all Chinese global or international initiatives are open for any party to take part. So I think this is also an area that both can cooperate, but unfortunately, we haven't seen they are actually areas to struggle against each other, but not. But this should be a lot of space exploration is another, and non-proliferation like North Korea and Iran, and area and hotspots like Afghanistan and Myanmar. I think there are quite a few, but both sides just have to give the political commitment to start doing one or two things and to change the atmosphere so that we can go further.
Related to that, General Yao, there's a question from the Philippines. So, General Yao, how will the cultural differences of China and United States affect the geopolitics of the next decades? How should the respective countries address these differences, General Yao? That's a question from the Philippines from Jericho Dalian. Go ahead, General Yao.
The difference between China and the United States, I agree with Lukyanov that it has a profound culture and historical background. It's not purely economic, geographic, or geostrategic, or even ideological. So my advice is that other countries should decide based on your own national interest. And in most cases, what is in your national interest will be in the long term in China's national interest. And I think United States and China should try to not to force others, smaller and medium-sized countries to choose side, just to decide according to your own national interest.
Thank you, General Yao. There's a question here from Sulhilmi Hasim from Malaysia, and maybe I would like to ask Professor Kishore to answer this question. Professor Kishore, to what extent do you think the dialogue between the US and China has been effective for de-escalation? Since bilateral dialogue seems insufficient and narrowing, would multilateralism platforms such as ASEAN can further continue to the effectiveness of the dialogue? What do you think?
Well, I think, the problem is that United States and China are now both giants. And I suspect you need to have a room of relative peers that can influence the United States and China. Let me say one thing. I happened to attend in person the first APEC leaders meeting that took place in Blake Island on Seattle. And this meeting began with a lot of tension because Bill Clinton had just come into office in 1990. He won the election in 1992. And his most famous line was this: unlike George H.W. Bush, I will not coddle the butchers of Beijing. He said that in November 1992. And then 1 year later, we were in Blake Island and Bill Clinton was meeting for the first time President Jiang Zemin. And I can tell you, I saw in my own eyes, President Bill Clinton coddled President Jiang Zemin and really embraced him. And it struck me that the APEC environment, where you had other reasonably big countries there, put pressure on these two. So I actually think that the Indonesia's chairmanship of G20 is coming at a very important time in 2022, because the G20 is big enough to try and maybe nudge US and China towards a more cooperative relationship. And if it's any other, ASEAN on its own, I'm afraid, is not big enough, not strong enough. But when you have leaders who are peers speaking up, then I think it's possible. So I would say get the G20 to try and moderate the US-China contest, which will be in the interest of US and in the interest of China.
Thank you very much. Now we have come to the conclusion of our session, and we still have a few minutes. And by way of conclusion, I would like to ask each speaker their 1-minute thought about the issue of confidence building amidst competition, amidst strategic rivalries, and amidst these alignments. Where is confidence building measure in all of this? So let me start asking Professor Smith by way of conclusion. A 1-minute thought, please.
Well, thanks, Rommel. Well, firstly, we have to continue to talk to each other. We have to encourage the US and China to engage in competition, but not contest. And I think we'll see that done in a variety of formations or institutions, whether it's AUKUS, whether it's ASEAN, whether it's the G20. We all have a role to play. But I'll finish with this cultural point, which is what I've noticed being a member of the Australia-China high-level dialogue for a couple of years in 2019, 2020. The change for China that China needs to think about is this. China says we've got to engage in mutual respect. But if China self-determines that a matter is of China's core interests, then it won't countenance any view other than its own. And if a country won't abide by China's view or determination, it will subject it to economic punishment and economic coercion. And China needs to think about that, because that is what is currently causing China to lose respect regionally and globally and to cause consternation. In other words, if a large power can put pressure on a smaller power, that causes consternation and then leads to potentially escalation. And that's what we need to avoid. But I think the one lesson here for China is think about determining that a Chinese core interest is something only for your own determination. It goes to South China Sea, it goes to a whole range of issues, but that's currently the starting point in the cultural differences from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Smith. General Yao, your concluding statement, please.
Yeah, I agree with Professor Smith that the most important thing is to talk and to keep talking, but to talk without pre-assumed consumptions or biases, prejudices, and try not to label, not to place labels. Try to be more open-minded, and as for because Professor Smith mentioned change for China. China has changed recently. China has been changing all the time for the last more than 40 years. It changed enormously, very fast. It depends whether how you look at the changes. You cannot deny the change. China's change had contributed to almost half of the world's economic growth, and the change has contributed to 20% of its people getting out of poverty. So just try to be more balanced. As for economic sanctions, I should say that China is more on the receiving end of economic sanctions over decades, and China is still under many sanctions. We are getting used to it. So try to think the other way, so that we can understand each other better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General. Professor Kishore.
Oh, very quickly, I've spoken a lot about the US-China contest. At the same time, as you know, we in this region want the United States to remain in this region. And one would think that what would prevent the United States from staying on this region is external factors. Actually, the biggest challenge the United States faces today, and I'm just reading an essay in the latest Economist from Francis Fukuyama, saying that America's biggest challenge is domestic. America has never been as polarized as it is before. And there's a real danger that Donald Trump will be re-elected in 2024. And frankly, if President Donald Trump is re-elected in 2024, America first, America's standing in the world will go down dramatically. So those of us who are friends of the United States, who want to help the United States stay on in this region, the best way we can help the United States stay on in the region is tell the United States, focus on your internal challenges, fix them, and then the respect for the United States will remain and grow stronger in this region. Because people in this region are very sophisticated. They can monitor what's happening in the US. And if the United States gets more divided, more polarized, then its influence will go down. So we should help the United States by getting it to fix its internal problems and therefore press the pause button on the US-China context.
And may I give Professor Lukyanov the last word to conclude our session today.
Thank you very much. Let me conclude on a very murky note. The confidence, you speak about confidence building measures. I'm afraid that paradoxically, confidence was the biggest victim of the period we just lived through after the end of the Cold War, for one simple reason, because we obtained an illusion that international relations will be organized in a different way anymore, which is not the case. That was a very unique period, and now we are back to normal. This normal is not very pleasant, but this is like it is. So we need to be realistic about how international relations work since ancient times, since Thucydides and Machiavelli. It did not change much. It changed a little bit, but it did not change much, which means that confidence should be built on, again, on realism, on honesty, and on very frank discussion about, first of all, power balance, power capabilities, military capabilities. And I think that China and US, as the main actors in the region, they should start be serious about that and cease to believe that economic interdependence can protect us from military implications in the future.
Thank you very much. That's the time we have. So I would like to thank all speakers for their wonderful contribution to our session today. And thank you to all participants, 11,000 representing 115 nations. Keep safe in this time of the pandemic. Mabuhay. Thank you very much. Shashe. Terima kasih. Bye-bye.
Terima kasih.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Romo.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kishore.